Well, good morning, everybody. We started a new month, and because of that, I just took a moment over the weekend to just reflect on how well I think I performed in forecasting spring weather. And I'll be honest with you, if I had to give myself a grade, it would not be very high. I think I'd force myself to retake the class. And I'll be honest with you, one of the things that was most challenging about this spring was just understanding what was going to happen when the jet stream lost momentum and shifted north. And my thought process was be careful of drought issues. I mean, that was it. And instead, you've been looking here at a map that looks back at the month of April and compares each of the major river basins throughout the United States. It compares them to historical averages going back 131 years. And throughout the Arkansas, the White-Red Basin, which is right through here, and over to the Ohio Valley, parts of the Delta, both the lower and upper Mississippi basins, extremely wet, right? We even brought in late season moisture into the Atlantic coastal plain, getting down here into the Gulf, and then just look at the map, right? And then we added this in the month of May. So this won't update until a couple of days from now for May data. So I'm just going to show you these statistics, which come from the Iowa State website. And again, while you could find yourself some dryness like here and in the upper Midwest, but this is North Woods areas, pockets of the Corn Belt are drier. But the narrative has been, this whole region, which has been so very wet for so long. And on top of that, the really wet conditions that are forecast, the really wet conditions that happen in parts of the Dakotas up there in kind of spring wheat territory. And you look at all that and say, man, how did you do? Were the predictions from this winter on what spring was going to look like, now that we're 2 of the 3 months into it, did they look like this, right? Or did the severe weather forecast pan out? I actually will tell you, I think I did better on the severe weather forecast than anything, just suggesting that this was going to be an extremely active year because we had so many of those ingredients coming together back in March and April and May that was just going to allow the atmosphere to kick off multiple rounds of severe weather. Now, my focus was I thought we were going to see a whole lot more here, but as you see, it was much more expansive. Where we've not yet seen a lot of severe weather is rolling up through the northern plains. It's not that there haven't been much, but usually that happens in the month of June into July, that it spreads into the northern plains. But it is important to take note of what this looks like here. Also, to give you some stats, just to see this, our tornado count, 1,041, average is 779, so way above average there. Our hail reports also above average by about 206, if you just look at the differences here. But the wind reports, still roughly double in terms of severe winds we've seen so far this year. But I'm thinking on it, and I'm looking at a map like this, right, which shows the next 7 days of forecast precipitation. And where we've already been so wet right here in this part of the Red River Valley, over toward the Ohio Valley, what do we see in the forecast? Just more wet conditions. And, there's that phrase, drought begets drought, but it's the same thing. I mean, wet begets wet. We just tend to be able to recycle moisture, and patterns tend to become established and stuck, and we end up getting something like this. So here's what I want to do. I want to evaluate those spring forecasts to be transparent on what they showed. And I will continue. You can't just take failure and quit. We've got to keep going with the forecasts and see what we see out there so that if there's information I can convey to you on any sort of risk going forward, we're going to do it. So let's just talk through this real quick at the beginning of this forecast video, because we're going to add a whole lot more rain into the southern plains, into parts of the Mid-South. And as you look at this forecast, what it's doing here, let me shrink it up so you can see the color bar real quick. Sorry about that. But what this is doing is we've essentially turned this whole region into a bit of a brown ocean. I probably shouldn't have called it this last week, but I said the Gulf of the Mid-South, right? This region where there's so much saturated soil and so much flooding that we are locally evaporating much higher amounts of moisture into this area. And this was not the forecast. Right? This is not what was predicted. In fact, I was chatting over the weekend with a friend of mine. His name's Dallas. He lives right down here, and we were just saying, do you remember we talked back in, I think it was February, maybe it was January, and he's like, hey, what should I prepare for? And I said, look, it's very dry, and I'm worried that this is going to continue. I was transparent, I don't know, I'm basing this off signals I have right now. But do you remember back in March, massive dust storms that were ripping across this area, right? And then we got so wet in April and again in May, and now we're going to see in June more moisture in through here as well. But just remember this. When we go back and look at the drought monitor on March 4th, it was quite expansive throughout parts of the southern plains, throughout the western Corn Belt, getting over to the Great Lakes states. We had drought that was building into the southeast, pockets in the northeast, and then, remember from winter, our lack of a subtropical jet kept this whole region in drought, and so was Mexico, right? So that was what was going on as we started spring in March. And then as you just look now, this is how the drought monitors changed. So again, there's before, and here's the current. Now, we could still make an argument that there are issues in the western Corn Belt, right? And that's been something we've been concerned about. But when we went into spring, we were seeing this, and we were seeing large dust storms. We were seeing storm systems blow fast across the country. And we were looking at soil moisture maps that looked like this on April 1st, right? I mean, those were deficits from last fall's drought. And when we look at historical forecasts, when we look at long-range forecasts and base them off historical information, one of the most important ingredients is soil moisture. And so we looked at this and said, man, there's a problem. And we would convey it to you. Hopefully we weren't building up a hype. At least I hope this channel wasn't building up hype. But then we get to here. That's where we currently stand on 100 centimeter soil moisture percentile. So again, when you look at this, think of it as a rank. And we are saturated through this corridor, and we are still below normal across these areas. And does that make them vulnerable? It does, right? It will make them vulnerable later in the season to drought risk. And we've kind of kept that narrative. But I got to pull back and temper that just because of what we've seen as of late. Now, how well did the models do? I saved all this stuff, so I'm going to go look at it. This was the forecast for the month of April. I think when I look back on the narrative that I carried through winter into spring, every talk I gave, I mentioned that I thought the eastern Corn Belt was going to be wet, right? There was better signals for that. I thought that the most active severe weather corridor was going to be here. It was much more expansive than what I thought. But even at the beginning of April, this was a forecast that was generated on March 25th for April. It did not pick up on the wet conditions that were here. And it really didn't show the drought that built in April into Nebraska. Right? It just didn't. It had some of that, but really didn't see all of it. Now, it actually overly predicted the wetness that was in the western part of the United States. I got it right through here. I'll give the model full credit for that, but take a look at this. This is the European model. This is the National Multi-Model Ensemble's prediction for April, May, and June. Now, it's precipitation rate, so it's not total precipitation, but it's precipitation rate. But you can look at this and start to infer where these lower rates could lead toward drought development. And this has been just dead wrong, right? So the National Multi-Model Ensemble, it's a blend of 7 different global models, and it whiffed. This is a big whiff. Now, we always look at it with a grain of salt, and we always compare it to the European model, which is here. This was the April, May, June forecast released in March for precipitation, April, May, June. And you have to look at it and say, all right, not bad, got this. We did bring through wetter conditions here. It was drier there, but man, this region down through here got the sign wrong. We were much wetter here. And this didn't really pan out. We've been very dry in this area, especially in the month of May. So this just kind of tells you, again, something that I need to keep relearning my own lesson here. And that is in chaotic nonlinear systems that exhibit high tendency for chaos. They're not predictable. So it's good every once in a while to get knocked off your horse and have to reset and rethink the way you think this is going to go. And right now, I would just tell you that these next 3 weeks from now through the solstice are going to be the most critical for watching the pattern evolve into what we think this summer is going to look like. Now, I want to remind you of something. We had very interesting signals in the ocean temperatures. This is an animation starts in early May and goes to early June. And that cold water there, has been a major narrative of mine. That's the negative PMM region. And that is one signal that says, hey, West Coast probably doesn't have major risk of extended long time periods of excessive heat, right? Tempers the temperatures in the West and tends to make that risk in the central U.S. How many times have I said if it goes over cold there as we lead up to summer, that's an indicator of the atmosphere losing momentum and dropping troughs in through here so that ridges build into the central United States. That's been another narrative. We've been watching these ocean temperatures with respect to the upcoming hurricane season forecast and the relationship with where the Bermuda High is going to sit. Is it going to be near Bermuda, or is it going to waft off over here toward Iceland, Greenland, or Ireland? We watched the Western Pacific warm pools stay warm, the Indian Ocean not exhibiting strong skill in terms of jumping on one side or the other of the Indian Ocean dipole. And so with all these indicators, we knew that the forecast kind of lived on a knife's edge. It was going to tip one way or the other. And there were concerns. There's always been concerns about drought, just given where fall left us and where these ocean temperatures evolved. But as we think about it, I just want to bring up a point I made last week. This was almost a disastrous forecast. Now, it was a disaster if you were in Canada, because underneath that high is where those wildfires are burning. But seeing the jet stream in the month of May dip like this, that could have brought in much colder water into this area. And then the push to the north of the jet was not well predicted by me until they got going. I just didn't see it until they got going, were the repeated slow-moving low-pressure systems that went through here. And those were the ones that flooded out the Arkansas, the white, the red. These are the ones that flooded out parts of the Mid-South. And as they went underneath this high, okay, my thought process was this high was going to be centered here and be much more expansive. And that's why I continued, about a month ago, just saying, hey, I'm not so sure that we're going to be able to get into June and not be talking about major drought problems. But instead, this is what the atmosphere did. So you need to see this, because going forward, we're going to be asking the same questions. I just got off an interview a few moments ago, and the first question was, are we going to get into a flash drought scenario? Is the pattern going to flip-flop? Because a lot of times when you've lived here, your brain is saying, oh my gosh, we've been too wet. Are we going to flip this thing over? What's going to happen? There's a constant thought of we never return to normal but always overshoot. And there's some precedence for that just to think through. But it's just a reminder of how close this spring was to having big problems. Now, there were big problems, of course, in Canada. Take a look at the latest satellite data as the sun was coming up this morning. You can see in the infrared the wildfires. In fact, just take a look at yesterday on Sunday here. Now, we had some nearby cloud cover, but boy, those fires are still raging underneath that. And just looking at where that smoke is going to go, this is how things are shaping up just over the next 48 hours. Still quite a bit of wildfire smoke spreading farther to the east as the pattern is slowly evolving in that direction. But I just want to show you yesterday, look at the smoke coming down through the central United States. And there's actually some smoke here from those same fires. Meanwhile, large storms erupted along the Front Range of the Rockies. We had more deep convection. You can kind of see it in and around Dallas just as a general area. And we even got, if you just take a look down here, some more storm activity in Central Florida, which has been extremely hot and extremely dry. Now, Alvin has been dissipated. It was into this area, and there's kind of an upper level low that is spinning here that's got part of Alvin's both energy in terms of its motion and movement, and also some of its moisture in there as well. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I thought it was interesting to look at the shape of this smoke and then look at yesterday's high temperatures. Well, not high temperatures, but late in the day temperatures around 22Z. And it's interesting to see that the smoke, along with a north wind in this area, kept it considerably cooler, plus the Great Lakes are in there as well, than it did when you were in more clear skies, which were here. Very hot day yesterday in parts of Texas, which helped these big storms explode into this area, in the Central Valley of California, which was very hot last week. Had another hot Sunday here, as you can see. Now, thinking all of that through, take a look at the temperatures, though. Since May 18th through yesterday, it's been very, very cool in this area. And if you planted a crop at the same point last year as you did this year, you're about 250 to almost 300 GDDs off of your pace from a year ago in this particular region. Meanwhile, extremely hot to finish May in Florida, along the Gulf Coast, and in parts of the Southwest. But we know that's cool enough now because of the tropical system that's going through there. So then we get talking about the tropics, and I want to bring up something important. There is going to be, this happens every year at this time, there's going to be a lot of hype showing up on social media about tropical systems. And they're going to use one model in particular. It's called the GFS. Now, the GFS, I love this model. I think it's got tremendous potential. It's been a great model to use as a complement to the entire modeling suite. But it has had some issues since, honestly, over the whole time period here. See how it just keeps losing skill over time. And it did that again at the end of the month. And about the time that it did that at the end of the month, and now starting June, is still well below where the European model skill scores are. We're starting to see stuff like this. Now, there's the newest GFS forecast. This is the 0Z run, and I just want to show you something about it. As I play this forward, I'm going fast because I'm going to come into more detail on this in a few minutes. Always out there, past day 9 or day 10 or day 11, the model tries to do that. And look at this. It's trying to bring in a tropical system of some potency by Friday, June 13th. Oh, Friday the 13th. Didn't think about that. That's coming right into, Louisiana, parts of Texas. And I'm going to tell you, these are typically phantom storm systems in the model. They're not there, okay? I want to show you another way to think about it. I made this off of Tropical Tidbits, Dr. Levi Cowan's website. And it is a forecast for the exact same time, Sunday, June 15th, and it's showing you several model runs for that same forecast time period. So we call this DPROG DT, the change in prognosis over time. And if you have a look at this, look at how just much it bounces around at that time frame. And I want to also remind you of something else. We don't typically rely on the GFS, especially early, to do these tropical predictions. If we have to use a model, I think the wiser model to use would be the European and its ensemble. Now, there is actually reason why we're seeing this area starting to show up with more tropical risk of formation, okay? But take note, it's not here. And we'll talk more about what's going on there in just a moment, okay? But we already saw, Alvin did this, and we're now starting to see better evidence of more coming out of this East Pacific view. But that evidence is here. This is also a major part of the upcoming subseasonal forecast. Over the next 15 days, we're seeing a larger area of tropical subsidence in these areas and rising motion moving here. Now, where is here? Well, by June 9th, 10th, and 11th, that is sitting. So just look it up. It's right here. And that's why we're starting to see the lid come off of the atmosphere to make these tropical systems. But trust me, be careful with what you consume on social media with respect to weather forecast. If you do not trust that forecaster, and how do you build trust? Well, that's consistency and truth-telling in the forecast. Then just take it as hype. Or if you see something, you're like, what is this? Just email it to us, and we'll get you an answer as to whether or not we think it's really a high probability event or not. But I will mention this. Something interesting is going on in the tropics, and you could see it yesterday. Do you see this haze that's in the satellite view coming off of Africa? Now, that's the wildfire smoke here, but this is not wildfire smoke. It's that time of year, June, where we tend to see these big convective dust plumes leave the Sahara and just blow across the open Atlantic. Now, I may have misspoke. They're not convective. Convection is a part of this, but not convection in terms of making massive thunderstorms. It's heat that's creating a wind system that's called part of the trade wind system, and it's just ripping off big plumes of dust across the open Atlantic Ocean. So there will be parts of the East Coast that have dust from the Sahara, watch it here, and wildfire smoke from Canada. Most of this will be deeper in the atmosphere, so you won't necessarily be breathing this in at high concentration, but it is important to take note of that. All right, since we're still talking about the tropics, I do want to show you something. Let's just go back a couple days. That was Alvin. And as we kind of step it forward, Alvin met up with another low that was here. Maybe you can see it better at 500 millibars. There it is. That's the cutoff low. And that cutoff low shoved Alvin into this, and it just died. Alvin just it's done. But that cutoff low is still sitting. If we kind of get up to today, there it is. And it's got a friend right there is another one. So the main jet stream is way up here, and there's a pair of cutoff lows. And what's interesting about it is that's kind of where we've got some precipitation coming in. So through this morning, there's kind of what we saw from Alvin, and here's where the cutoff lows have brought in some moisture into parts of Arizona, and some more possibly coming into southern California. But over the weekend, an exiting front made it very wet in the northeast. We had scattered storms, some of which produced some large hail that went through this area. In fact, I think there's the last 7 days of hail through parts of Texas. More just added here after watching last week all those hailstorms rip off through Texas, Oklahoma, coming out of the Front Range here in Colorado and New Mexico as well. But if we think about it right now, this is where that cutoff low is kind of leaving some of its moisture. So this is just a radar animation, just kind of looking here across the United States and Canadian prairie. There's actually some snow at higher elevation here that's in the Rockies north, and more moisture that's moving out of Montana into parts of North Dakota too. But this is going to continue to sit and spin over this area, adding a bit more moisture, but it's not really getting into the LA basin or into the Mojave Desert much as initially anticipated. So where's this all going? Well, those lows have to continue to progress east. That's the way they're going to go. So what we see is the day 1, 2, 3, and then again on Thursday, there's more severe weather risk for the southern plains. This is day 3, so I'm talking about day 4, which I don't map. But there's going to be a time period of not only heavy rains, but also more risk of severe storms. You can see the risk of the heavy rain coming right back into that spot we identified at the beginning of this forecast video. So let's go and have a look at it. High-res NAM model to get us started today. There's the moisture that's moving through the northern plains. See the cutoff low coming out of Arizona here. Storms over Florida as all this takes shape in the midsection of the United States. We're just going to keep an eye on this corridor for strong to severe storms. So just watch this very carefully tonight. Again, you want to see that region highlighted. It's here today and there tomorrow. So let's get into tomorrow. This is the overnight tonight, getting into tomorrow. Look at Nebraska. I mean, just more rain coming to Nebraska, parts of Iowa, Minnesota. These were all areas that we still actually have some concern about, summer precipitation problems, but it's not now. And that moves through, comes right through Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan. I got my M states backwards there. And there it is. That's what we see moving through. Meanwhile, there is another low that's trying to take shape here. See it in the Gulf, right in through that area with a complex of storms around it. I need to see more of this rainfall getting into Florida, though. We've got to break that drought cycle in Florida soon. So all that being said, that just gets us all the way through the beginning of Wednesday. If we look over the next 10 days, here's the chance at grabbing another inch. And just like I talked about last week, by we I mean me. Let me be very clear here. I really thought that we would be seeing more problems on the drier side than the wetter side at this point in the season. I just did. And it's not there. In fact, here's the chance at 2 inches over the next 10 days. And here's the chance at 4. And it's just this epicenter of incredibly wet weather we've seen on repeat for several weeks. And it's coming back again. Now, there are dry spots. There are parts of the Canadian prairie, parts of the northern plains, and of course the west, but this is very typical for the west this time of year. So just a couple things to kind of consider here. I did want to compare models. So GFS is left, Europeans right. Let's kind of get a sense of the timing of these next few systems. So we've watched in the high-res NAM that frontal boundary get here by Tuesday night. There it is. So we're going to keep an eye on that for severe weather. And then it just slowly moves east. This is now by Wednesday afternoon. So both models very well. I mean, this is quite consistent out there to 66 hours. Look at these features. They're all kind of lined up in the same spots. I like that. I like seeing consistency in the models. But that's just, we're out to Wednesday. When do they begin to fall apart? Well, there's Thursday getting into Friday. Low comes out. European model stalls a frontal boundary here. Lets the low try to move to its north, but kind of crumbles a bit. So that's all the way out to Friday evening. We get into the weekend. That's when the frontal boundary attempts to go through parts of the mid-Atlantic down toward the southeast, right over to the Tennessee Valley. Much more prevalent in the GFS than the European. And here's the weekend, Sunday into Monday. And they are both consistent on this. So out 7-8 days, they have at least found that feature. Now that's next Monday. This is where they really start to break apart. So the GFS creates a hurricane. We keep the southeast wet in the European. The GFS tosses another low with a front, and we don't quite fully see that in the European. So we expect them to break apart at some point. But just to show you a few more of the pieces here, over the weekend, several folks were texting me and asking about, hey, are we building in some significant heat risk toward the middle of the month? Because we were starting to see some of these longer range models, June 11th, 12th, and 13th. Look at this. Drop a western U.S. trough and build out some sort of ridge. So there's one piece there and one piece there. And by the 13th, 14th, 15th, that's a pretty sizable ridge building into this area. Now, if you just looked at that and said, what does that mean when you're in June? Oh, this tends to mean that we go over to hot, dry conditions at that point. But the week 2 forecasts all show wetter conditions here because of what's starting at the beginning of that week. Okay, so the beginning of the date, June 10 to June 16. The farther you get towards June 16th, the more we're seeing that heat trying to build into this area. But you can almost get a sense in my tone here that I'm not convinced, because I've been burned by these two-week model runs for weeks, and I've not been able to stay ahead of where they've been kind of in their biggest missteps. And maybe it's a temperature question. Maybe that's what we're missing. Because we know that today's going to be hot in the Midwest. Okay, we have one low here, another front coming through the north. And as this plays forward, that's Tuesday. Look at that front dropping through here. We get into Wednesday. The west is already starting to heat back up. Northeast is heating up. That's Wednesday's high temperatures compared to average. There's Thursday getting into Friday. Look at the heat coming back to the Central Valley, Columbia Basin, Snake River Valley. We then get into our weekend. That's Saturday and Sunday. A lot of heat in the western United States. Now, that heat in the western United States can reorient the jet stream pattern such that it gives us a little bit of a drier go, but it's got to stay that way. And if you look out here, that's the next 5 days compared to average. This is day 5 through 10. Look at the heat coming on in the western states. And day 10 through 15, that's when the models are attempting to build some sort of trough here, ridge there. And the question will be, does it actually come in and bring those temperatures up by the time we get to the middle of the month? So, all right, we've now looked at everything we can look at for the next 2 weeks after evaluating performance, and we're going to say, well, where's it all going? We've been waiting on some sort of a signal from the MJO, and it is attempting to give us that, right? See this? Look at that thing coming out there. That's in the extended. Here's in the 2-week outlook. There's some sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 transition. I showed it to you earlier in that Havmuller diagram, but it's fast. It's a very fast transition. Rather than taking 3 weeks to do this, this is doing all of this in the span of about 2 weeks, so it's much faster than average. So we have to be skeptical of using it. And what I mean by that is sometimes these convectively coupled Kelvin waves, which is what I think this one is, do not align themselves with historically what typical MJO transitions look like. So for example, we're about 150 to 160 days into the season. A phase 6 to phase 7 to phase 8 transition should mean more cutoff lows here, or lows over Florida with big ridges that build into Montana. That's a typical sequence of events. And maybe the models have latched onto that. I don't know, but I'm very skeptical of what this may look like out that far. I can then tell you that maybe this is what is being seen by the CPC. They just did their newest month update. And remember, if you put lows in here, guess where it's wet? Arizona. They probably have this whole region wet, primarily because if the jet goes over the top, you just tend to be stormy in this area, and it's already wet there. So therefore, they've gone for equal chances on temps too because of cloud cover. If that ridge, remember, I'll show it to you just a second ago. Look, if you put a ridge here, then that also makes sense that we've got Montana to Idaho and Washington, Oregon drier. Does this expand? Is it more into this area? That is a big unknown at this particular point. I'll tell you this, the CFSV2 wants to do it. So from June 16th to June 22nd, it's trying for drier conditions Midwest, Great Lakes, wet Cotton Belt. But then it flips it to 23rd through 29th. Okay, we're a little drier upper Midwest, that part of Canada. But then it's like, I'll bring the storms back on. So we look at all of that and say, well, what's the European model say as we try to wrap this forecast video up? Well, from last week, all that I'm watching, I'll show it to you here. All that I'm trying to understand is, where are these big subtropical highs going to be as we go through the middle of the month? Does the Bermuda high have a piece that lives here versus breaking off and going to the North Atlantic? And is the Pacific high going to shift north, or is it going to shift north and west? But if these put the squeeze on North America, you are not going to stop this precipitation pattern. So I don't know. I just don't know at this point. I will tell you this. If we just go out there it is. That's July the 4th, or excuse me, let's go to July the 4th. There you go. That's June 4th to July 4th. Now remember, a lot of this is coming now, but it's trying to go over drier in this area. All right. So what? This model has been doing all sorts of crazy things. And then watch, if I extend more of July in there, it's back to its old shenanigans. Put that line right here, make this all drier and this all wetter. It's been doing that for weeks. Yet it's not panned out in that subseasonal forecast. So I'm working on something because I want to understand this better, and I want to understand model skill and when you should and shouldn't use it. And if I can make some progress on that over the next few weeks, I will definitely share it with you. But this is what I know right now about where this is all going. Okay. Last thing I'm just going to tell you, if I have any sort of predictive skill, it's going to come from looking at the angular momentum of the atmosphere. And we feel pretty good about that forecast. Now, what was missed as this momentum died comes back to that May map I showed you, right? This is the one where the cutoff lows got in the way. Have we started another one of these? And is it going to come picking back up later? That is what we want to know. So listen, over the next month, 3 weeks, watch this. If this comes back down, especially due to drop in momentum in the Northern Hemisphere, that's going to be our signal. If the global wind oscillation, which is here, I looked at this on Victor Cassini's page, if it starts meandering its way down into this area, yes, we are going to talk about a flash drought scenario in summer. But until then, let's not craft a narrative that doesn't exist. These are all what ifs. So there it is. I just kind of wanted to chat with you on where my mindset was thinking about this new forecast going forward and where the missteps were in the past. There are still vulnerabilities. I still expect major disparity in precipitation like we've seen in the month of May. In other words, you get your top 10s and your bottom 10s. I think that's going to be the way that this summer goes. It's just who has it and who doesn't. I'll work on it. Matt and I will work on it, and we're going to figure this out, and we'll keep you up to date, all right? I appreciate your attention. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.